Well, hi, teachers and parents and people who are interested in teaching and learning. So there's the popular notion of executive functions, that they're like the brain boss, telling everybody what to do. Or the even more problematic idea that they're basically synonymous with organizational skills or work management skills. These are not only misleading, they obscure the reality of them, which could fundamentally change the way we teach and assess and relate to kids and ourselves. But before I go any further on this topic, I do not want this information to feel like yet another way to be inadequate that I'm going to blithely dump on top of your current cognitive and emotional load. That would be a violent act. I'm not here to do that to you, and I invite you not to do it to yourself. I do invite you to let this wash over you and see what sticks. If you start feeling overwhelmed, take a deep breath. You are awesome now, and you'll be awesome when this is over, no matter what. Seriously. So, why is understanding executive functioning so important? Number one, kids get blamed every day for things they cannot control, which alienates them from their learning and the people who are trying to teach them things, and teaches them to blame themselves as well. In the moment of our interaction with a kid, their levels of executive functioning are entirely out of their control. Simply put, the popular misconception of what executive functioning is causes us to blame children for things they cannot control and to demand that they fix things that they cannot fix. 2. An enormous part of every grade for every class in every school says much more about executive functioning than it says about subject matter mastery. We have to understand executive functioning if we are ever to create assessments that actually assess what they claim to assess, and grades that actually communicate what they claim to communicate. So, if executive functions are more than just attention, working memory, inhibition, and shifting, well then what are they? To understand what they really are, you have to think carefully about what the brain actually does. Your brain generates thoughts and emotions. It processes sensory information. It stores and retrieves memories. And it governs bodily functions and actions. Executive functions are the brain's many different ways of managing, calibrating, and coordinating all of these things: the generating, the storing, the processing, the governing. Say I'm walking into science class. I'm excited because the person I like sits next to me. I'm frustrated because my mom said we can't afford the summer camp my friends are all going to next month. My pinky toe is throbbing painfully because I stubbed it hard on one of the bed legs this morning, which reminds me how clumsy I think I am, which makes me wish I didn't have to sit next to the person I like because I will probably embarrass myself. So I weave between desks in a roundabout way to my seat, carefully avoiding some people and trying to catch the eyes of others, until I notice an agenda on the whiteboard that says there's a quiz today, which I did not realize. I say "quiz" louder than I meant to because I didn't notice the bell had rung and everyone else was quiet. There are chuckles as the teacher asks me to sit down and they hand out the quiz, mumbling instructions that I don't hear. Now, my ability to keep any one of those discomforts from overwhelming me and pushing out all other thoughts is an executive function. In the school hallway, to avoid embarrassment or harm, I've had a broad sensory focus, watching for social dangers and islands of safety, filtering input for that purpose, and also to avoid sensory overload. I may have avoided sensory overload by focusing on thoughts about home or camp or fantasies. These thoughts may have brought up strong feelings which I may or may not be able to control or escape. In the classroom, then, I have to shift completely from that broad focus in the hall to a focus that switches fluently back and forth between materials on my desk and information from the teacher, while also trying to be attentive enough to my peers that I'm not socially disconnected, but not so attentive to my peers that I fail academically. My ability to shift smoothly and quickly from the hallway rules for perception and action to the classroom rules for perception and action is a cluster of executive functions. In a classroom full of kids, that shift will take seconds for some, minutes for others, and others may not really be able to shift at all. None of them have any choice in that matter. Emotions and thoughts can work together in adaptive ways if the brain has the ability to guide these interactions. Something has to decide how much to focus upon thoughts or emotions individually, whether to focus on generating new thoughts or gathering more data, or both, and at the same time to turn away from cognitive perseveration and emotional overwhelm. This self-management of brain activity is executive functioning. And how I do on that quiz will be directly affected by my ability to navigate my emotions, shift myself into classroom mode, focus my thinking onto the task, and filter out the sensory input that distracts me from the sensory input I need. And all of this is just a prelude to the next massive shift to another, different, complex set of executive functions required for taking a quiz. Perceiving what's on the page accurately, sifting that information for saliency, recognizing connections between what is on the page and what I've learned, pacing myself to complete it in the time given but not so fast that accuracy suffers, flexibly changing strategies when one doesn't work, inhibiting impulses to talk, stand, look around, cheat, belch, scream, sleep, or poke somebody, and on and on and on. So about that common understanding of executive functions as if they're like an executive in a company telling everyone what to do. Obviously, that oversimplifies them, and also often creates the notion that executive functions are about controlling behavior, controlling our actions. People will say a student needs executive function coaching because they're not organized or cannot plan their work. But teaching someone to use a planner is not teaching them an executive function. At best, if it is done well, they are being taught to navigate their current level of executive functioning to make planner use effective and helpful, but their actual executive functioning will not change. And just as importantly, their executive functions do not only manage their actions, they also manage their thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Think about that. Your executive functioning is the collection of nonstop, real-time decisions your brain makes, sifting through perceptions, guiding your thinking, navigating your feelings, and coordinating your actions. And they are all at play all of the time. Now, you may have noticed I said, decisions your brain makes. And I think that points to a good way of understanding executive function development. Did the baby decide to throw their food on the floor? Did the teenager decide to drive 60 miles per hour through the neighborhood? Did the partygoer decide to talk about pickleball for 3 hours straight? Did the tween decide to focus on the sensation of their t-shirt tag on their neck all day? Obviously, these brains are deciding to do these things. But do these people feel like they have decided to? The degree to which a person can consciously decide which executive functions to employ toward which ends, how much, and how effectively, is a reasonable indicator of executive function development. Executive functions are all about metacognition. How much say do I have in what my brain does? How much do you have? For me, it varies wildly by the stimulus, the intention, and the executive functions involved. Isn't that true for all of us? GEORGE McCLOSKEY asserts that there are 33 executive functions, but many sources will try to simplify this, naming the 4 executive functions or the 7 executive functions. I think we are better off embracing McCloskey's model, whether or not we actually learn all 33 by heart. But why? Why should we break them down so far to where there's so many? Is that really necessary? I think so. You see, all of these functions are interdependent and, at the same time, they develop separately in each of us, each at its own pace, and eventually, each to its own level of ability. This means that you cannot assume that a child who has a strength in one executive function has a corresponding strength in any other. They develop separately. A child may be incredibly skilled at managing emotions but have incredible difficulty shifting from one task to another. Or They may discriminate phenomenally well, easily noting and identifying the thesis and arguments in any article they read, but they have tremendous difficulty initiating tasks and monitoring their pace of work once they are on task. How often is a child perceived as smart and then chided for shortcomings that they cannot control because adults assume smartness applies, at least to some extent, across all their cognitive skills? And how often do a child's off-task behaviors or struggles with homework lead to assumptions that they will have corresponding challenges in other areas? Those are faulty assumptions. Executive functions should be thought of more like a child's height. No amount of willpower will make that child taller. We can teach them to get a step stool, but we cannot teach them to be taller. Metaphorically speaking, we're teaching them to get a step stool when we recognize their efforts, normalize their challenges, and help them try alternate strategies. On the other hand, we're basically demanding that they be taller when we tell them to pay attention, pull themselves together, stop making careless errors, or self-advocate, without showing them how to do these things using the brain that they actually have. To be fair, we make the mistake of inferring many high skills or low skills after seeing just a few for good reason. That interdependence of executive functions can make it seem like the problem or the strength is much more global than it is. Take memory, for instance. Memory depends on a whole set of carefully calibrated interrelated skills from the whole list. Perception in order to gain accurate and complete data. Attention in order to hold that data and process it adequately. Inhibition to keep your brain from jumping ship when it perceives a squirrel or ice cream or a phone notification. Discrimination to help you to differentiate between important and unimportant details, and so on. So it really behooves us to get to the core of the issue for ourselves and our students. Say we have a kid struggling in math based on their scores. We see that they understand the material when we teach it and can demonstrate that accurately at that time, so we realize it must be a problem with memory. But if we want to help them efficiently and quickly, we need to go deeper. Is it a problem of perception? The classroom is full of cues and subtle associations that scaffold recall and implementation of learning in ways that may be totally inaccessible outside of the classroom. Also, interacting with the teacher provides all kinds of subtle support with focus, pacing, and discrimination that will not be available when the teacher is away. Perhaps the child is entirely focused on solutions and procedures, so rather than memorizing the concepts, they remember the way they manipulated digits and symbols on the page. Perhaps even the specific digits themselves, so that when they see an unfamiliar problem, it doesn't relate to anything in their memory, so they cannot apply even the rote learning they may have worked so hard to gain. That's not even a memory problem, but a problem of misplaced focus. Or maybe when they've tried to understand math, they have felt dumb over and over, so they're overwhelmed by feelings of anxiety when any new concept is presented. So they're on high alert, focusing entirely on getting through the class or interaction with the teacher as quickly as possible so that their shame will not be revealed. This disrupts all cognitive processes, but especially learning and memory. Hopefully you can see that all of these students need different things, and simply noting that they are having trouble retaining their learning and suggesting they study more or do more problems is basically telling them to be taller, and it will be about as helpful as that. Thus, the more granular we go, the less likely we are to make faulty generalizations about a person's strengths or struggles, and the more likely we are to be able to intervene and help efficiently and effectively. Okay, speaking of granular, take a deep breath and get all zen if you can. Here come the 33 executive functions according to GEORGE McCLOSKEY. I think it's worth going through them. Don't worry if it's just too much or you don't yet have the mental framework to make this meaningful for you. And if you find yourself losing track of these because one of them has struck you and you're thinking about it a lot, do that thinking rather than worrying about staying with me. These will all still be here for you later. Okay, here we go. First, the categories. These aren't actually the executive functions themselves. These are just the broad categories they fall into. So first there's the category of attention, basically choosing what to engage. And then there's engagement, getting that going. And then there's optimization, improving the effectiveness of the engagement. And then there's efficiency, which is basically the same thing as optimization. And then there's memory. So that's grasping and maintaining the learning from that engagement. And then there's inquiry, using what you've learned to improve future engagement. And the last category is solution, which is the most complex and sort of holistic level of engagement, kind of putting it all together. So those are the categories. Now, the executive functions themselves, you need to think of each of them as something that cues or directs perceptions, feelings, thoughts, and actions. So it can be applied to any of those. Under attention, we have perceive, focus, and sustain. So perceive is basically notice stuff. Focus is choose what to emphasize and what to de-emphasize or ignore. And sustain is to maintain continuous attention on a perception, feeling, thought, or action. Under engagement, we have energize, initiate, inhibit, stop, pause, flexible, and shift. So energize is deliver the right amount of energy to specific perceptions, feelings, thoughts, or actions for success. Initiate is start. Inhibit is keep from acting on impulses so one can direct effort elsewhere. Stop is immediately switching between perceptions, feelings, thoughts, or actions. And pause is a quick temporary cessation that allows quick return to a perception, feeling, thought, or action. So flexible is the ability to switch PFTAs to more effective or preferable ones. Shift is to smoothly change from one set of PFTAs to a new one for a new task. And then under optimization, we have monitor, modulate, balance, correct. Monitor is check PFTAs for accuracy on the fly. Modulate is regulate the amount of energy directed to PFTAs. Balance judges the likely cost benefit of emphasizing different PFTAs. And correct is the ability to learn from experience and apply it. Under efficiency, we have sense time, pace, sequence, and execute. For sense time, it's just awareness of time. Pace is awareness of one's rate of production, processing, etc., one's rate of engaging and moving through PFTAs to achieve something. Sequence is the ability to optimize the order of PFTAs toward a successful end. Execute is the ability to activate a known series of PFTAs toward a successful end. And then under memory, we have hold, manipulate, store, and retrieve. Pretty self-explanatory. Hold is the ability to keep info in working memory while using it or manipulating it. Manipulate is the ability to alter PFTAs held in working memory. Store is move into long-term memory accurately and completely. Retrieve is remember. And then under inquiry, we have foresee/plan, gauge, estimate time, analyze, and compare/evaluate. So foresee/plan is look ahead, just minutes or hours, not far ahead, and apply or get ready the appropriate PFTAs. Gauge is judge which perceptions, feelings, thoughts, and actions are needed for success and activate them. Estimate time, know how much time is needed and or how much is left. Analyze, basically metacognition, thinking about what's going on, what you're thinking, what you're doing. Compare/evaluate, it's basically making a mental T-chart of pros and cons of one PFT or A versus another. And then finally, under solution, we have prioritize, generate, associate, organize, plan, and choose. So prioritize is decide the relative importance of PFTAs and order them accordingly. Generate is respond to the need for novel PFT and or A by engaging it or them. Associate is notice and make connections. Organize, use routines. Plan, figure out which PFTAs will be needed to do something soon in minutes or hours. And choose, make a decision now. So those are the 33 executive functions. My reaction was, this is overwhelming, and this doesn't seem very scientific. Well, It is overwhelming. But I'm telling you, you can back away from the detail, especially at first, and focus on the gestalt or whatever level between those gets you down to merely whelmed, and you can still reap the benefits as an educator. As far as not being scientific, the bad news is psychology is not very scientific, especially when it comes to the brain. We do our best to apply the scientific method, but a lot of it is applying a theoretical framework that is really just a story and seeing if it sticks, if it's helpful. The brain is incredibly mysterious. If you can come up with a way in which the brain cues or directs PFTAs that is not on this list, you should add it. And I can tell you that GEORGE McCLOSKEY, whose folks devised this list with him, is extremely respected. Now, I've seen many kids struggle with many things in many different ways, up close, longitudinally. This has led me to a very unscientific bias. I believe that when people can do something they are invited to do, they do. Nobody's opting out to be difficult or because they are lazy. If they can do it and they know they can do it, or even that they may be able to do it, they will. Basically every time. If they don't, it means they either don't think they can succeed or something else has higher emotional stakes for them. And in either case, pushing them to do the thing they are not doing is neither kind nor effective. We need to either prove to them that they can be successful by finding chunks that they can do successfully or learn to do in an instructional context of more success than failure, or else we need to change the emotional stakes surrounding the task. That is it. That is the whole story. And for anyone who's skeptical, well, what if I'm wrong? What if a person is actually not doing something they're completely capable of doing in every sense and without some other need getting in the way? What would happen if I approached them with the assumption that they are doing the best they can and that I care about their being okay more than I care about any task they may need to complete? What harm is done? Maybe they think I'm foolish, but probably they appreciate the genuine care being offered, even if it is unneeded. More importantly, I think being treated as if your intentions are good, your efforts are seen and respected, is simply more motivating and more enduringly so than any other approach. And if the occasional sociopath gets to think, "Ha ha, fooled you, Mike Miller," so be it. And even more importantly, by extension, not only do a person's reasons for not doing a particular thing make perfect sense if I were truly in their shoes, but all of their behaviors make perfect sense if I were in their shoes. Thus, if I tell them they are wrong, they're doing the wrong thing, I'm guaranteed to be contradicting their actual lived experience, which is far more compelling to them than anything I can say. So that is basically useless for helping them to change, and it is also corrosive to any trust I hope to build with them. Thus, if I want to change behavior or build skills, my teaching has to be about creating lived experience and guiding the interpretation of it to help the student reach new conclusions about themselves and how things work and what is possible. This notion of creating experiences instead of delivering information has led me to believe that we need to teach everything the way we teach the arts when we do that well. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. More to the point, I see teachers every day who are frustrated because they keep asking kids to do things that the kids cannot do, and these darn kids aren't doing them. This is why I want everyone who teaches to have a sense of these 33 executive functions, so that we can all differentiate between things for which a student's desire to do them actually impacts whether or not they do them, and things they cannot do yet, so that adult frustration doesn't lead kids to believe that there's something wrong with them because they're unable to do things that kind, reasonable adults seem impatient about when they don't do them. Let's see what would happen if we all looked at our students, assuming that if they could do what we are asking, they would. So if they aren't, perhaps they can't. This is the point at which we should be thinking what executive functions are required to complete that task, and how could I remove those from it to give the kid a chance to succeed. It's not necessarily easy to do, but when, again, multiple times a week, I hear adults talking of things they've asked kids to do over and over, but the kids don't do them, and there's clearly an assumption that the kids just don't care enough, or aren't paying attention, or are deciding not to do the thing. I doubt it. they don't care? Everyone cares. Unless they have bigger emotional fish to fry or caring in the past has only seemed to lead to frustration or humiliation. So what they need is help with those bigger fish, or carefully crafted experiences of success in the context of real emotional safety, meaning a context wherein not succeeding isn't really a thing. It's always just learning. So what about not paying attention? Attention is a set of executive functions, so you can't just decide to pay it if it is not developed far enough yet. Okay, then how about deciding not to do what is asked? Deciding not to do something is actually a rather advanced executive function. It's statistically far more likely that a student has encountered any of several dozen less metacognitively sophisticated executive barriers to achieving what has been asked. Let's use this understanding to help design activities that hold very high expectations for students in areas about which they have some agency, and build in multiple entry points for different levels of executive ability. We tend to teach what we love. Wouldn't we all prefer not to alienate students from our subject by inadvertently making them think they are bad at it, when they're actually just being asked to jump through hoops that are too high, that often have nothing to do with the actual content being taught? I think so. Of course, we cannot teach and learn without pushing our executive functioning abilities to their limits, and literally everything we do is dependent upon them. So I'm not pretending we can remove all executive function requirements from our classrooms. That's literally impossible. Again, I just think having this lens to use when considering what is really being asked of students, and especially using this lens immediately when students do not engage in tasks or seem to refuse to follow instructions, can dramatically reduce the levels of academic trauma we unwittingly inflict upon students, and increase students' eagerness to engage, resilience, and courage in the classroom. Please look in the description of this video for links to simplified descriptions of all the executive functions, as well as comprehensive descriptions. In addition, I highly recommend playing executive function bingo with peers. Links to materials and instructions are also in the video description. And thanks so much for coming on this journey with me. Please send me your most incendiary questions, criticisms, and corrections at any time. I'm at mikecanhelp.net@gmail.com. That's mikecanhelp.net@gmail.com. Let's talk.